Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining in today. I am very pleased and honored to have my good friend, my longtime friend, Erick Ybarra. He is a Roman Catholic, I would say, scholar and author, historian, student of history, teacher of history. He has probably the best book on the papacy that is out. Check it out on Amazon. I think it's called, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric. The name is Papacy, Revisiting the Catholic Eastern Orthodox Dialogue. That's the subtitle.
Yep, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Check it out, everybody. And obviously, my good friend Elijah Yassi. We go way back. Thank you for coming on, Elijah, with us too.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Yeah. All right. So, like you guys see, we're going to talk about the implications of the papacy and in the Chalcedonian topic, in the topic of Chalcedon and the events surrounding it. So, I don't think it's a surprise to any of the viewers that the Oriental Orthodox view on the Council of Chalcedon is that in order to accept Chalcedon, you need to accept the papacy. And the Roman Catholic view is the same. So this is kind of the meat of this episode, this show here today. We're going to talk about how that works. Why are we saying that this implies this? Why this equals this? And we're going to start off, obviously, with Leo of Rome. We could start with the Tome, with the Synod of Rome 449, wherever you want to start, Eric. Where would you say is like kind of the door opens for this kind of discussion? Is it Leo's letter to Dioscoros about when to change certain days for ordinations of priests, or where would you say this kind of starts?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm not worthy of any of the things that Daniel said, but I appreciate his kindness. That's for sure. But yeah, on this point, I think it's interesting. You mentioned Leo's letter to Dioscorus because a lot of people don't realize that Leo wrote to Alexandria, basically saying that, look, the see of the master and the see of the disciple between Peter and Mark everything should be the same in terms of discipline, which is weird to see that from Leo at the time. But I think this particular matter on the papacy in Chalcedon, it really starts with Eutychius's appeal to the bishops, and in particular to Leo, and then that council in Constantinople, which processed a judgment, in 448. I want to say in either the fall or winter. I can't remember, but that brought Rome into this dispute in the East with this archimandrite of Constantinople, and who is Eutychius. And some people say Eutyches, Eutychius. We mean the same thing. And what we see from this is we see a council is eventually called by Theodosius II, which is already going to be a point of exploration. Why is an emperor calling a council? Which I assume many of your listeners have heard you before say that this is just the historical fact. He's the one who had the authority to call these councils. And when that council was called, Leo kind of took it for granted that, Rome would send representatives to represent the West at these councils, and that the primary driver would be whatever literature or decision or judgment that came from the pen of Peter's successor. And Leo had a deep consciousness that he fulfilled this role in the church, and he felt obligated. That's more of what he felt more than anything else, because from a Roman Catholic point of view, lots of the scholarship will refer to Leo as a powerful pope. He was that. There's no doubt about that. But his stated words is that he felt compelled, because of the position that he had, to act and intervene in the East, and to make sure that his decisions were getting carried out. And so that ends up manifesting itself at the Council of Ephesus in 449. Long story short, Leo's plan didn't work out. And what we had there was basically things got there was a huge tangle with some of the folks in the East and some of the folks in the basically East versus East at this point. We're not talking about East versus West here. We got East versus East issues. And then that's when Theodosius II passes away, and then you get Marcion, Emperor Marcion, or Saint Marcion, in the Orthodox Church. If you're listening from the Orthodox tradition, he is he himself is totally in line with Leo's tome. He's totally in line with going against Eutychius, and in particular making sure that the Nicene faith, and the way he understood it, which he thinks Leo had it correctly, would be sort of brought to bear in the East. And so Chalcedon is called following the entanglements of Ephesus 449, which in the Roman chancery was a council that was not to be adhered to. At least it was a council that needed to be respected. There were certain decisions that were made that you couldn't just say nothing happened. But it was basically neutral in the eyes of the Pope. Everything was neutralized. So some of the decisions could be potentially ratified. Some of the decisions are not going to be even considered. And one of those was that, people who were condemned by the primary players at Ephesus 449 would not have to sustain that condemnation that they received at Ephesus 449. And so for Leo, that was a completely neutral situation. Other things could potentially be ratified, like the election of the Antiochian patriarch. Things like this would, Leo's not going to say, "Oh, no, scratch that all." No, I mean, it was a legitimate procedure, So at Chalcedon, Leo intends to just have Ephesus 449, most of it neutralized, and then Dioscorus, who he thinks is an absolute heretic, to have him repent and believe the tome, or else face excommunication. That was the big instruction from Pope Leo the Great. And so that's really where you get, this papal intervention. Marcion is on board with the Roman policy. He even threatens the people at Chalcedon who didn't, there was a point where they were like, well, we don't know if we want to go with the Pope's plan here. And then Emperor Marcion sent instructions to the imperial commissioners saying, if they tell you that, tell them that I'm ready to change the venue to Italy.
Yeah.
So it was heavy-handed stuff at Chalcedon. There's no doubt about it. So the East didn't see things this way. At Alexandria, for example, in Egypt, you have a whole host of Christians that believe that they can pick up their Christianity and go another way if they have to, you know.
Yeah.
Leo didn't see it that way, and
Right.
neither did this, at the time, the See of Constantinople and the emperor. So you had clash of powers, clash of ecclesiologies at this time.
Thank you, Eric. So a few questions kind of
Yeah.
arise from that. Would you say, well, I guess it's a two-part question. Would you say that it's super interesting, to say the least, that early on, a pope, a bishop of Rome, thinks that he can overturn single-handedly an entire ecumenical council, which, as far as everyone was concerned, as far as the emperor was concerned and Roman policy was concerned, that was a legitimate ecumenical council.
Yeah.
So Leo thought that he can just throw out the entire council, and that's normal to him. That's the first part of the question. Second part of the question is, you were mentioning some procedures within the council were upheld. Do you think? Well, I'll save that part for another part of the question. Another question,
Okay.
but we can just stick with the first part. That's fine.
Yeah. Like, where did he get this idea?
Because I don't think it's happened before, has it? Where he's like a pope can just single-handedly, like the whole council doesn't count.
Yeah. There was, as far as I know. Well, actually, no. So there was an instance that comes close, but not really, and I'll explain why. So before Nicaea 325, at least in my understanding of the history, right? The church does not understand a specific organ called an ecumenical council. In other words, it's not like in 270, everybody's like, ooh, when are we going to have a first one of those ecumenical councils,
Right.
I mean, they have their synodal procedures in regional territories, and they use the postal system to intercommunicate between regions, and that's kind of how they made decisions for worldwide disciplines, if it needed to be. Like we see that with Victor and the date of Easter. They held synods, right? And then they sent letters, and they everybody who had agreed, they signed their name at the bottom of a document, and everybody kind of knew who was residing in these regions, and then their names would be hallowed, in a diptych or a note. They'd have a script take of their names of the people who were in agreement with the Catholic faith. But when you get to the situation with Constantine, where Constantine wants to bring Christianity out into the public sphere, well, now you've got the emergence of something like an ecumenical council at the Council of Nicaea, right? After Nicaea, there were some questions on whether the decrees of Nicaea were inalterable. Some people in the East did not think they were inalterable. Some people in the East did. So Athanasius, for example, he calls it the Holy and Great Council, right? That's what the Nicenes, they called it the Holy and Great Council, or the Great Holy Council. They thought that was a moment where the Holy Spirit spoke, and so God spoke and taught the church at that event. But other people were kind of like, well, we kind of brought terminology that's not biblical. We had, the Arians and the semi-Arians who were questioning just how forceful the decrees of Nicaea really were. And so you had some people, asking the emperors in the East and the West to convene new councils. But so the person of Athanasius undergoes examination, as well as some other people in the East that semi-Arians didn't like. And you had the convocation of the Council of Sardica, which in the plan for Sardica, there's no difference between Sardica and Nicaea. Both the emperor on the west, emperor in the east, they both agreed to hold a council in Sardica, which is in Sofia, Bulgaria, in the area of Bulgarian region today. And so in their mind, though, they're thinking, oh, this is the next time we're doing this, where we're going to have an imperial vestry, commission, protection, lodging for the bishops, everything. It was going to, the next phase into this holding of a council. But the East, a huge contingent in the East did not go because they saw foul play in that there was an already acceptance of Athanasius when the whole idea was to examine him, and yet the Pope kind of rushed into accepting Athanasius, and so that council ended up having just a few Eastern bishops, but mostly Western bishops. And at that council, they singled out Rome as a place where accused bishops who get charged by local and regional synods could kick up the question of their condemnation to the court, a higher court, that court being the court at Rome. Yeah, we're talking about like a legal structure here, where the bishop of Rome would examine a certain trial that took place anywhere in the East or the West, and he could be able to say whether it should be revisited or it should close. The books get closed, or if the situation remains an open question and that particular person deserves another hearing, he deserves a more objective defense, unbiased defense by nearby bishops. And so you had this arrangement where Rome, because it was the See of Peter, because it was the first see, had this arbitrating decision on whether bishops could have their cases reheard or finalized for that matter. And the popes in Rome took that to mean that they could pretty much do that with anything, whether it was a local council in the East, a local council in the West, or a worldwide council. And we see that in Liberius, the life of Liberius, where the emperors Constantius tried to dogmatize semi-Arianism at the Council of Rimini, or Rimini or Armenium. I'm catching I think it's the Council of Armenium 359, where they brought up a semi-Arian creed, and most of the bishops there went along with it. Well, when Pope Liberius got free and came back to Rome as a free man after being held captive for years, he wrote a letter to the bishops in the East saying that council is a dead document. And it was known at that time as sort of like a cancellation of 359. But most people in the East that were pro-Nicaea, they didn't see it that way. They just said, no, it was a wrong. It was a false council because it was wrong,
Yes.
So then by 379, Pope Damasus writes a document where some people bring to his attention that the Council of Armenium 359 said that, number one, I think it drew a huge question on the deity of the Holy Spirit, and then also said that Christ was like the Father in all ways, right? But then Pope Damasus responded saying, well, hold on a second. Rome was not there, nor was any of his legates. No, the Bishop of Rome was not there, nor was any of his legates. And he named a couple of figures that were, that they had the job of representing Rome at the time in the 4th century. I want to say that one of the guys' names was Victor. He referred to Victor. Victor wasn't there, and and so the idea in his mind was, well, that council doesn't really have a good upstanding because Rome wasn't there. We didn't review the decrees, and there wasn't a papal legate there. So that's why when you have the Council of Constantinople in 381, it's called ecumenical, oikumene. It's called that in the Greek. Emperor Theodosius I, he thinks what's happening is another situation like Nicaea, Sardica, Rimini, some of the other councils that were held that were imperially overseen. He thinks it's just another one of those. But in Rome, they never collected those decrees and canons as like Nicaea. So Nicaea was on the shelf in its own status for Rome for many decades to come. So by the time you get to 400s and 440s, like with Eutychius and Flavianus and all this, Rome is still under this impression that all these councils, whether they're local, regional, they kind of have to go through the filter of Rome's review, and until then, it's kind of neutral. Maybe the council made the right decision, maybe it didn't.
Okay, so for Constantinople 381, I know it's like on a tangent since we're talking about Chalcedon, but I'm just curious. For Constantinople 381, what do you make of, and I don't know if the Eastern Orthodox agree on this point, what I'm going to say, but as far as the Oriental Orthodox are concerned, it wasn't, we didn't view it as an ecumenical council until deep into the 5th century. What do you think the reason for that is? Being, and I'm not saying like as for the Oriental Orthodox, but in general, the church. Why do you think the church was late in recognizing 381? Do you think it's because of Rome? And if so, keep in mind, it was at Ephesus 3, which is a non-Chalcedonian council,
right,
475, that the Oriental Orthodox officially canonized that. So,
yeah, this is like one of my greatest interests is this Council of Constantinople 381, because some scholars even say that Rome knew about it, and they thought, and Rome's position was like, okay, let them hold their council, and that just, it's like, wait a minute, Rome knew about it and was okay with it. Some scholars say this, and one of the issues there was that there was an early departure of the Patriarch of Alexandria.
Yeah, we have that.
And
I think Father Shenouda's book, Father Shenouda Ishaq.
Yeah, he left before some of the last
Canon 3. He walked out.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah, my memory's fuzzy on the details about that, but I remember that this was passed afterwards. And so in Alexandria, they always considered themselves the Holy Great and second, patriarch in the order of sees.
Right.
Which is why, like at Ephesus 431, Cyril has no problem, thinking that he has presidency over Constantinople,
Yeah,
because
and if you notice, even when they recite the creed at Ephesus, they recite the 325 creed, not the
yeah,
381 creed.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, man, I would really love to go back in history to see how this all played out. But it seems to me that Rome thought it was. It looks like maybe Pope Damasus knew about the council, but the council was lost on the memory at Rome, because Pope Zosimus, Boniface, Celestine, um, they don't really have, they don't show cognizance of that council.
Mhm.
Um,
Neither does Cyril
yeah, that's another
and
mystery.
Dioscoros. Even Ephesus 449 doesn't recognize Constantinople 381. They
Yeah.
also use the creed of 325.
Yeah, so like I said, this is one of those great things that we could probably produce a number of conspiracies about. But Cyril, uh, he's one of our key figures. The absence of that council in his working theology and in his creedal construction, his creedal reference is Nicaea. It draws huge questions as to the prominence of that council. We know that at Constantinople and in the imperial chancery, it was very important to them, because at Constant, in future councils, they love referring to that council.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Uh,
um,
I think, as far as I know, I don't know if you know of an earlier case. The first time I see it mentioned is the Home Synod of 448. That's the first time I see anybody mention it.
hmm,
449 doesn't mention it. 451, in I guess in commemoration of 448, mentions it.
hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Some Catholic historians have said that, like, Pope Damasus knew about it, and that's one of the reasons why he wrote the Order of the Sees.
Mm,
That Rome was not based on the primacy of the imperial city, but the the primacy of Saint Peter. Some people say that Damasus was responding to 381, but the scholarship today is generally put that later than 380, than the Damasus's pontificate. But Constantinople wrote to Rome about their council. So it seems like Rome knew about it in the 4th century, but maybe it
I mean,
was forgotten.
I'd be surprised if all of the seas didn't know about it. I mean, it's happening in the capital of the empire. I'm sure
Right.
they knew about it, but I'm not sure if it was viewed as a universally encompassing council of all the seas or a local Constantinopolitan synod.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when Rome starts to talk about it, they start saying that the Greeks, they'll refer to the Greek council,
Mhm.
or the council in the imperial city. They refer to it as a local affair. There's no doubt in my mind about that, because
Yeah.
and even, I mean, even as late as Pope Gregory the First. So that's going into right at the tip of the 7th century. Pope Gregory says that Rome never accepted the canons, but we do accept the creed.
Mhm.
That's I mean that's huge.
And then Dioscoros at Ephesus 449, he implied that this is the third council, and then that would be it. Like for the Holy Trinity, there was only three councils:
Yeah,
Nicaea, Ephesus 1, Ephesus 2. That in Dioscoros's mind, like
right,
Constantinople didn't count to
right.
him.
Yeah,
Uh,
and he said it with, like, as if it was inconsequential. Like,
yeah,
he wasn't expecting to be nailed against a wall.
exactly. There was no
Yeah,
like what no. He wasn't expecting anybody to think otherwise, right?
yeah, yeah.
Uh, um. Okay. So you were saying that some of the the parts of Ephesus 2 were accepted at Chalcedon, such as replacement of certain bishops in certain sees. In the case of Anatolius and Constantinople, Flavian had died before. In the case of Maximus in Antioch, Dominus was still alive.
Yeah.
So, and then I don't know about you just said it to me, but I didn't know before that Leo thought that Dioscoros was a heretic. I know the Eastern Chalcedonians at Chalcedon didn't necessarily think he was a heretic. They thought he was wrong for excommunicating Leo or whatever else that they said, but not necessarily. They didn't question his orthodoxy. It seems like maybe the Antiochians did, but people like Anatolius of Constantinople and the more moderate-leaning ones didn't. Do you think for Dioscoros's ordination and elevation of Anatolius and Maximus, how does that play a role at all in Leo's thinking of these guys are legitimate see holders or not? Because I'm just imagining in our church today, if there was kind of a rebellious part of the church, and then they did depositions and ordinations, even if the guys that they put in agreed with the right side eventually, they still can't keep their spots because they got them wrong. So how does Leo kind of make how does he justify keeping parts of Ephesus 2, not all of it?
Yeah. So my memory is a little fuzzy on exactly how he justified these, but I can tell you what I do remember.
Yeah.
Is that for Leo, acceptance of his tome was like
Non-negotiable.
It was non-negotiable, but it was like you're hired at the casino. Like if you accept the tome, whatever you guys did there, if they accept the tome, they're good. Like,
Okay.
It's like he didn't want to investigate further. If they accepted the tome, then and those who accept the tome, if they're the ones that are in authority, then let's keep it that way. And the ones who are not, if they had any kind of a modicum of support to Dioscorus or to the prior council, whatever procedures were done, it doesn't seem to me like he was intent on. I think he was very trusting in those who accepted his tome, in other words, and that they handled affairs the right way. But I could not tell you exactly on Maximus and Anatolius. I know that at first he was a little concerned about Anatolius, but he seems, as soon as Anatolius is like on board with the tome, on board with what Rome thinks is going to be the resolution to the Eutychian affair in going into the council. He accepts the ordination of Anatolius. But I do remember there being, Leo having suspicions in his epistle to the emperor. I don't know exactly what he said. Now, Maximus in Antioch, this was something that I think the papal legates at one of the sessions brought up, one of the later sessions brought up. And I think Anatolius may have written to Leo, and the information fed to him was that Maximus was, that basically was a peaceful transition. And so he was okay with, he was okay with putting Maximus as at the name of Antioch, of the Antiochian patriarchate. But I would say I would need to look at that history before being certain on exactly how Leo, I know that he did accept those two, obviously, Anatolius and Maximus. And, Why he did that, it would take me an hour or two in my library, but I don't have it fresh on my mind.
It's okay, no worries. Is there any truth to this question, Eric, about like the tome? Well, there was a kind of a under the table deal made, kind of Constantinople is recognized by Rome as number 2, and we accept the tome. And then the legates, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, at Chalcedon, they were complaining. At Ephesus 2, they sat Flavian at number 7 or 8, and then at Chalcedon, the legates tell them, "Yeah, we have him at number 2. Don't worry." Like they're making fun of them.
Yeah. No, I'm not aware. Everything I know about Pope Leo's exchanges with Anatolius, Marcion, Juvenal, the papal legates was all that it was tome or nothing, and Constantinople can't even dream to be second place.
Okay.
That's what I recollect. So.
Yeah. So you said earlier, you said it again right now, tome or nothing. Like there's no, like, we're having this council, sure, but we're gonna accept the tome, or we're gonna go. And like you said, we'll do the council in Italy. We don't care really what you guys are gonna say. This is what matters to us. Okay. I think for the East, there's that, and there's also how Theodoret walks in exonerated, and session 1, Dioscoros goes, what is he doing here?
Right.
And they said he's restored on authority of Leo. And Dioscoros says, by what canon can he single-handedly restore a guy who's deposed by a council?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so, and then obviously maybe the argument for the other side would be, well, yeah, but Theodoret had his trial and then he was restored there. But clearly, I think for the unbiased eye, Theodoret is restored as soon as he walks in. That's why Dioscoros asks the question. So like, what would you say the reading is in terms of the papacy's role at Chalcedon, in terms of the exoneration of bishops, the condemnation of bishops, the faith put forth there, and kind of the submission of everybody to that?
Yeah. So it Leo refers to the Nicene canons.
Which Sardica, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's one of those things in early Roman history is they had one codus for Nicaea and Sardica, and so the heading for Nicaea carried over the canons of both Nicaea and Sardica and the decisions of Sardica. So they didn't have a second heading, Council of Sardica. It was Council of Nicaea, and you would read Nicaea and then Sardica. So a lot of popes would just say the canons of Nicaea, but it still boggles my mind because they refer to the date 325. So when Leo refers to those canons, about how a bishop can appeal from a council to the pope or to the court of the Roman pontiff, Leo is thinking that the 325 God-inspired bishops decided that. So when Leo's writing about the ability to appeal the decision to any bishop can appeal to Rome, he's thinking that everyone in the East already accepted that at Nicaea. And you can see that because he doesn't try to convince anybody. He's just saying, he told Marcion, well, let them know in the East that according to the canons, we have heard the cases of those who were grieved by the recent synod, meaning the synod of 449. So in Leo's mind, it is the canons of Sardica, canon 3, 4, and 5, which allow Rome basically to hear appeals. But Rome takes it as, well, we can hear the appeal, order a retrial, or we can decide it for ourselves.
Okay.
So it expands. In other words, the powers are kind of expanded, especially when the prospect of having a retrial is not possible, not feasible at the time. So when you have something that was perceived as like a violent, evil, program at Ephesus 449, Leo will still refer to those canons as a way to justify neutralizing its decisions. But not every decision is uh, obliterated, which is why he sent the legates to, with certain instructions on, what to do if this happens, if that happens, because, it was a council, and many people in the East still saw it as a council. They respected it as a council at Chalcedon. The papal legates never said, hey, let's not refer to it as an ecumenical council. But because of Leo's appeal to Sardica, they felt that they had the right or the authorization for Chalcedon to rectify what was done at Ephesus 449.
So and correct me if I'm wrong here in how I'm looking at the events, Eric. For in the Home Synod of 448, Flavian writes about it to Leo, and he tells them, "Hey, this is what happened. This is what happened with Eutyches. Eutyches is appealing it, whatever. Eutyches also appeals to Leo. Yeah, the emperor Theodosius II, who was the same emperor from Ephesus 1, he likes Eutyches. He wants to do the council, so he orders it to happen, whatever. Leo writes his tome as the judgment of the appeal, essentially. Leo's tome, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Leo's tome in his mind is the judgment of Eutyches. So then Ephesus 2 doesn't read the tome. It doesn't condemn the tome. It doesn't condemn Leo. It just doesn't read it. And then there's many opinions for why that is. The scholar Every in Eastern Christian Churches,
George
Review,
Every.
Yeah, he in his article, The Monophysite Question, he talks about reasons why. And among those reasons are, why would you read a judgment if the trial didn't happen yet? So in the mind of Ephesus 2, that's why they're there, is to have the trial of Eutyches. So then the tome kind of becomes, in their mind, obsolete because it's before his now Orthodox confession. Now it becomes unnecessary. Now in Leo's mind, that's not the case.
Right.
So how would you see that?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. George Every, I'd hate to go against him. I mean, he was a maximal Byzantine scholar. I think he was excellent. And we have to give a rational explanation for why the tome was not first order procedure at Ephesus 449. And I think that hostility against Rome doesn't appear to be a motivating factor, so it looks like they wanted they wanted their own procedure, something fresh and something that was more relevant, in their minds. And of course, other people may have had suspicions about the tome, and I think that that's proven later when people by memory were able to cite parts of the tome, that they wondered about.
Right. Okay. If we're moving forward in history, so we already kind of touched on some papal implications on the Council of Chalcedon regarding Rome's role there. But if we're looking at it in context of kind of the period of time, why Chalcedon happens in the first place is because of Rome, because of the Synod of Rome 449, because of the Tome, etc., against the Synod of that has happened in Synod of Ephesus. If it was another see, let's say if it was Antioch who's doing this instead of Rome or Constantinople, is it going to have the sway to overturn an entire council and get a whole new council? That's how badly the emperor wants to reconcile that see. So I think that's a question for the viewers to think about. And moving forward after that, not too much later, you have the Henoticon era.
Mm-hmm.
And Rome is the only side that doesn't get in on that, the Henoticon. On the contrary, they're very against it. And so if you are an Eastern Chalcedonian, looking back, you kind of have to say, well, we were wrong about that. And Rome was right the whole time. And then in 518, they actually make that official with the libellus.
Yeah. I think so. I think that in Egypt, in Palestine, in Syria, they thought that Chalcedon was abusive, and they thought that Leo's tome was, relegated to at least dubious, if not heretical. And you see that in some of the letters that, like that one volume translation by Bronwyn, Pauline Neal and Bronwyn. It's called Conflict and Negotiation in the Early Church. They translated some of the letters before the Henoticon affair, where people in Alexandria, they knew that the Pope was not had universal jurisdiction and was infallible in his doctrinal decrees. And a lot of the Byzantines, the people in Constantinople didn't believe that either. But when Chalcedon becomes the massive debate of the theologians at this time, because it was not clear in everyone's mind in the East that what was done there was right. And there was such a good case for that, that emperors and bishops, even bishops who were okay with Rome, were willing to say, okay, well, let's, what can we do to resolve the past mistakes? And that's, one of the reasons why the Henoticon came out. And that one didn't reject it. It kept itself from condemning Chalcedon. But at the end of it, it says, if anyone goes against this document, whether it's in the East or whether it was done at Chalcedon. So it almost puts that question, like Chalcedon may or may not be on board. And in Rome, that was like absolutely unacceptable, because they thought Chalcedon was like a victory assembly, for the tome. And so I think the Eastern bishops who signed the formula of Hormisdas, that was the point that Hormisdas was trying to drive home. When you sign this document, you're not just saying we agree. You're saying that you agree with all of our protestations, from Leo to Hilary to Simplicius to Gelasius to Anastasius to Hormisdas, that all of them were right in this whole debacle over Chalcedon. And so it was basically an embrace of Rome's narrative on Chalcedon, not just hey, we're technically in doctrinal agreement. It was also an embrace of Rome's own conscious defense of Chalcedon.
Yeah. So we have a question here. To what extent was Theodore of Mopsuestia known in the West? I know that there is scholarly work on Augustine's connection with Theodore and Leo being a student of Augustine. I don't know, Eric, do you have anything on that?
No,
Okay,
no, I am sorry.
no worries. Uh, so you're familiar with the letter of 497 from the Church of Alexandria to Rome. So this was put forth by, I think it was Zeno. I can't remember who the emperor was in 497, or it was the one after Zeno. I can't remember. So the emperor encouraged Alexandria, as representing the East, to write this letter on behalf of the East to Rome to kind of bring them into the Henoticon fold.
Right.
What do you think let me ask it this way. Is there any evidence from anything you've seen that there has been any recognition or knowledge of the letter at all on the Roman side of things? Or we only get the one side?
Yeah, that's all I have. I mean, there were politicians in Rome that took it seriously.
Okay.
But the only person that they could have hoped to get on board was Laurentius,
Right.
who was not was finally ousted out of his competition with Pope. I just did a whole talk on this. Symmachus. Yeah, there we go. And Symmachus was a diehard Chalcedonian, anti-Henoticon guy.
Yeah.
The only guy that was softer was Anastasius, Pope Anastasius, who came afterwards. But he was willing to say, well, maybe we don't need to condemn Acacius, but he still said it was a sine qua non. The Henoticon had to be withdrawn.
Yeah, the hardline OO guys today, they'll look at that letter like sometimes they might lose some minutes of sleep because of that letter. I love the letter. I think it's a great letter. And it should be a blueprint for how we talk to each other nowadays. It's like, when you love somebody, you give him excuses, right? It's like Jesus, when he is interceding to the Father, he says, "Forgive them; they know not what they're doing." They know what they're doing, but he's giving them excuses.
Yeah.
And Saint Peter, he does the same thing in Acts. He says, "You didn't know what you guys did," when he's giving that sermon. So in the letter, the Church of Alexandria is telling Rome. They're still, by the way, using the titles like excommunication didn't happen. His Holiness Pope, whoever the Pope was at the time, Pope so and so.
It's Galatius, I think. Galatius.
Okay, so, but you know how like after excommunications they stop using titles for each other.
Yeah.
In the letter, the titles are there, and they're saying your tome in Latin maybe was fine, but these guys tricked us. These guys teamed up with Theodora and that crew. They tricked us when they translated into Greek, and they messed it up, and they made it Nestorian. So let's sit down and talk about it, us and you, in Latin. Maybe the translation is wrong that we got the Greek one.
Yeah. You're more familiar with this letter than I am. That's good.
Yeah. So it's a very it's a Christian way of talking.
Yeah,
it's refreshing to see, and within the politics and the controversy and the scandal of church history.
Yeah,
it's refreshing to see this kind of dialogue between two sides that are not together.
Yes. Yeah. What we see actually putting things into action is not always Christian. It's unfortunate, history.
Okay, so with the libellus, so obviously the implication of Chalcedon, I think, is there. I don't. unfortunately, it's not enough for some people. But when you see the tome is non-negotiable to that level, and then you see it within the historical context of everything else that's happening, when you get to the libellus, I don't see how that's deniable anymore. When
Yeah.
you're saying even the people who died as Chalcedonians, I have to remove from the diptychs just because they were not in communion with Rome. That's the only reason.
Mm.
How do you think that is that implicates Chalcedonians, like people who accept Chalcedon yet don't want to accept the papacy?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That it's a tough one. I mean, modern Chalcedonian Eastern Orthodox will what they'll say is that they have their ways of saying what's immovable action in history and what is perhaps negligible, wrong, or able to be rejected. The problem is that the libellus of Hormisdas acceptance was so far and wide, and it to me it seems like it achieved what an ecumenical council
Well,
would have achieved,
yeah.
just with more travel in different locations,
Mm.
and the the demand that the Pope was putting on the diptychal revision, what that is a that is a it was a in Rome's understanding, it was an order. And
Mhm.
even in the letters of Justin and Justinian, they refer to Rome's orders. So when they're able to get John of Constantinople, and then after him Epiphanius, um, to sign the libellus with many of those Constantinopolitan bishops, uh, they write back to Rome saying, that we have fulfilled all of your orders. Um, the 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 posture there is clear that Rome went there with an embassy
Mhm.
with the terms of peace to reunite with Peter's successor, who was privileged with certain promises, going back to Matthew 16. And yeah, I think that uh, it's everything that Rome teaches about itself being accepted. And if I was Eastern Orthodox, my hands get sweaty trying to figure out how I would get out of admitting that the Greek episcopate, the Chalcedonian Greek episcopate, embraced the papacy. I wouldn't know how to get out of that.
Me too. I
Yeah.
think, and obviously, this is my bias being non-Chalcedonian. I don't think this would be a surprise to you, Eric. We view them as the first uniates.
Right,
Um,
right, right, right.
so now, are you familiar, Eric, with the Synod of 536, Constantinople?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. I'm familiar, and I read about it, but my interest increased due to you.
Oh,
Yeah, back in the years ago when you would bring it up and talk about how you've got this universal presence, you've got a resolution, and so it really drew my interest then. So yeah, I'm familiar with it.
so as far as I know, initially it was viewed as the fifth ecumenical council.
Hmm.
Um, and the Pope Agapetus presided.
Hmm.
And it was the first council where a pope is
Was
present,
there?
who presides. Yeah. Do we know anything about it in terms of papal implication? I think just the order of events itself is like one of, because Justinian intended the council to be and essentially a reconciliation council where
Right.
non-Chalcedonian Anthemus of Constantinople presides.
Nah, but
And
that didn't work out.
right, because Agapitus was in town. Nobody
Right.
knew. This guy made like a WWE entrance, like everybody was
Yeah.
shocked, you know.
Right.
And he presides and he deposes Agapitus, and he deposes Anthemus and puts Mina there.
Minas. Yep.
And he again
With
with
Saint Minas in the Eastern Orthodox. Saint
yeah,
Minas.
and
Yeah.
so they and I think correct me if I'm wrong, Eric. He puts a rule, a canon, in that from now on, because you guys did this, the Synod of Constantinople has to get Roman approval for the patriarchs that they elect.
Yeah,
Uh,
that I don't recall that, but that I'll have to look that up.
yeah,
That's pretty interesting.
so again, you see within the Chalcedonian realm, popes kind of being, in lack of a better word, heavy-handed or single-handedly kind of pushing the Chalcedonian cause despite Eastern compromises. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. It's definitely. And what happens there synodally in 536,
Yeah.
it seems to be another occasion where today Eastern Orthodox will say, well, everything was done according to a synod. It's true it was done according to a synod, but look at the terms. The terms were Chalcedon, and Justinian was like, okay, well, I guess my hands are tied here. I can't have somebody on my team who's going to be against Chalcedon, or against the Tome, So, that's what, but we see then a risk being taken in the next 15 years with the Vigilius episode.
Right.
They needed the Pope again back in Constantinople because they knew that what Rome does at long distance. Rome says we're the successor of Peter. What we say is final. And so Justinian was not going to bother dealing with letters like that. That's why if Vigilius wasn't going to accept his edict on the 3 chapters, he was going to have him come back to Constantinople in order to do things face to face for what Justinian thought was for the wealth and prosperity of the empire. Then we see the tables turning a little bit. This is what historians call one of the humiliation point of the papacy and Constantinople's rise, to in power, basically, and especially the emperor of Constantinople taking authority. So that leads to a clash of heads. The Constantinople and Rome will begin to lock horns more from that point going forward. But I think the last time we see that is 536, before we start to see, those horns getting locked more.
So a lot of people make a big deal of Pope Vigilius's kind of reaffirmation, authoritatively perhaps, of the letter of Ibas before condemning it. Do you have an opinion on that, Eric?
Yeah, so this is where it's a debate that it's very if you get a group of people who have read the available documents, mostly whether it's the English translations or in the original languages and the scripts that we have, you can have a really fruitful conversation. But most of the time people haven't read the documents, and so it's really hard to make a good conversation on this. My perspective on Vigilius is that he himself was Chalcedonian in his Christology from the moment he went to Constantinople to the moment he left. So there, in my mind, his how should I say this? His badge that he wore was that he accepted Cyrillian Christology through Ephesus 431 and another badge for Chalcedon. So that's his badge. That's his stated confession. That's what he believes. The problem is he was put to the test with what happens when you put Chalcedon and Cyril on one side and the 3 chapters on the other, and you have a comparative analysis. Do they agree or do they not agree? And so that becomes a different that's a different test than a doctrinal one in the sense of where do you stand, because Vigilius was clear where he stood. So this really was a test of whether he could compare certain documents and the councils and see if they cohere or do not cohere. In other words, Vigilius, some people make it out like Vigilius went from being a Chalcedonian to being a Nestorian to being a Chalcedonian to, in his mind, he was never a Nestorian, right?
Well, the letter of Ibas was accepted at Chalcedon, so for him, he was just being Chalcedonian.
Exactly. So when he, but initially they convinced him when he first got to Constantinople, they convinced him like, look at what Theodore is saying here, and he was like, okay, yeah, this is, like you got one problem after the next, after the next, after the next. In Theodore's writings, Theodoret has issues where he's, writing to this person, writing to that person, agreeing with this person. It's like, it's clear these people were right in the wrong. And then the letter of Ebos criticizes Cyril at one point. So at first, the Pope was like, well, yeah, surely. I mean, it seems obvious now that I can see that what you're, showing me. I mean, people in Rome and in Italy, they'll all understand, right?
Yeah.
No, they
Then
don't
it
understand.
caused that Western schism there.
Yeah. Because especially in North Africa, North African theologians defended these documents, and they thought that they were Chalcedonian.
Right.
Yeah, but and so that's in their
How
minds.
long did that schism last? Do you know?
Well, it was different. It lasted different durations in different parts of the West. So in Italy, North Italy, it lasted for another. It lasted for like another 40 years in some places.
Oh wow!
Yeah, in North Africa, it was quickly healed. But Spain did not put that council on its shelf,
Right,
for another 200 years.
Yeah. Isidore of Seville continued to reject it.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, in Constantinople, Vigilius was put to the test. When he saw that the West was going to reject his initial decree, his initial they call it the Judicatum. I don't know why we call it a Judicatum. Why don't we just call them Constitution 1, 2, and 3? I don't know. They always call it the Judicatum, and then I don't know why. But the first decree, it was rejected in the West. Vigilius then, came to Justinian and said, "Wait a minute, I've got a conflict on my hands. We've got the whole West that's denying that we can do this because they see it as Chalcedonian." And then Justinian's like, okay, well, at least as long as we agree that this is the process, this is the plan, is to eventually get this edict, universalized. But through and through, Vigilius vacillated back and forth, and finally he came to the point where he said, okay, in Theodore of Mopsuestia's writings, I can admit it's Nestorian shot through, right?
Mm.
Theodoret's pre-Chalcedonian writings, I could see it's shot through with errors. But then it came to the letter of Ebos, which was of particular concern because at one of the sessions at Chalcedon, Ebos was accepted on the basis of a
The letter.
certain letter,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And so because Chalcedon linked itself with that letter, everybody who accepted Chalcedon, especially in the West, they saw it as inextricably bonded
Mhm.
to the infallible authority
Yeah.
of Chalcedon,
Mm.
which is interesting because they're Westerners. Why do they care about some Edessian?
Yeah.
You know, um, but for them it was the status of Chalcedon that
Yeah.
mattered.
Sure.
So Vigilius reads the letter. He's going through it, and for some reason, he's able to argue in his first constitution that no, what he's saying here about Cyril. Later on, he admitted he may not have known all the facts,
Mhm.
and he like a lawyer, he argued that Ebos was actually conforming to a single subject Christology.
Okay.
That's how he saw it.
Yeah.
But of course, the bishops at the council that Justinian held, they said no. That's it. He's an historian. That's it.
It's interesting that it took them 100 years. Like they read the letter verbatim in Chalcedon.
Yeah.
Nobody there said, "Oh, this is heretical. This is Nestorian." It took them 100 years for them to read it again. They were reading it for another extra 100 years. 449 already condemned the letter 2 years earlier.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. So
it's the same bishops. They were there. They just switched sides, and now that they don't want to say anything about the letter, all of a sudden,
Yeah, the historiography on that is bewildering to me.
Yeah.
It's bewildering. I know. So you got some people out there who actually believe that it was not a letter, that what they read was some recommendation from the Edessian clergy or something like that. It
Yeah,
makes
but I
no
mean,
sense.
yeah, if Chalcedon doesn't read the letter of Ebos in the minutes, if they just say the letter, and if they don't say what the letter is, they don't read out the letter, then yeah, maybe there's a case.
Right.
But they read the letter out loud, so we know which letter it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this is that at this point we're well too far into the scholarship to deny
Right.
that. So so Vigilius, he's looked at as a bad guy by a lot of people, but in my eyes, I understand what he went through. I understand what he went through, and it wasn't always easy
I
to
did too. Absolutely.
it wasn't always easy to please everybody at this time.
Right. So in this type of thing, in Roman Catholic ecclesiology, dogma, what is the binding part of 553 or the Vigilius controversy? Like, because some people would say, well, the quote about the letter of Ebos is infallible, and some people, and I don't know if it classifies as that because it's not dogmatic. I don't know if it is. I don't know, but and then I don't even know if 553 is dogmatic at all. Like I don't know what's dogmatic about it. So
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because the popes after the council, like Pope Gregory the Great, he wrote a letter to, when he was writing letters to North Italian bishops. He said that the council didn't cover any doctrine.
yeah.
So so a lot of people in Rome thought that, but one of the things that I bring up in my book is that before Vigilius left Constantinople, Vigilius had the excommunication of Justinian had the excommunication of the Vigilius taken out of the Acts, right? There's still evidence of his lack of honorifics in session 8, but the acts that Vigilius took home with him did not have a record of him being excommunicated, which is why nobody in the West really remembers it for a long time. Neither in the East either. A lot of people don't realize that, but so 553 ended up becoming dogmatic in Rome, and the constitutions of Vigilius, the second one and the first one, um, to this day, Catholic theologians are arguing over which one is authoritative and which one isn't. It's not an ex cathedra decree, because an ex cathedra decree is a doctrinal definition, right? Defining a doctrine. Well, for Vigilius, his definition was Ephesus and Chalcedon. That was his definition. He was using that definition and saying Ebos passes the test.
Yeah. So it's more like a judgment.
Yeah, it was a he thought that Ebos sufficiently conformed to what he understood to be the dogmatic rule, which is Ephesus and Chalcedon. But then in the next constitution, he says, "All right, now I see what Ebos meant. He clearly doesn't mean in that letter before his presentation at Chalcedon. This particular letter, which was not read at the council, in Vigilius's mind, that letter is actually demonic, heretical. It doesn't conform." And in his second constitution, he actually annuls his first one. He annuls it. So he believes his first one had authority of some sort because he had to annul it. You see? But he believed he had the power to annul it. So whatever Rome thought at the time, it thought that particular decree was revisable.
It's interesting, the reaction of the Western churches, in that they're so loyal to Chalcedon to the extent that they would go even against whatever the Pope did, and they're adamant about the papacy, and still they would be like, "Oh, that's not what we received." And I would argue at the time, if I was a Westerner, well, the Pope was under duress, so it doesn't count.
Yeah, so some Africans and the Milanese theologians, that's what they said, was that it would, Vigilius was not free. Yeah, so you had some people saying that. But the other thing is, some of those letters that were written by Westerners as to why they didn't accept Vigilius, they were basing their reasoning on papal authority.
Right.
So, like the Illyricum bishops, for example, when they said why they didn't accept Vigilius's Judicatum, they said, well, we can't accept that because we can't go against the authority of Peter and Leo.
Yeah.
So they were, it's like, it's like they weren't playing the chess game well, because it's like, well, if you can go against Vigilius, then you can go against Leo.
Right.
It's like, they weren't always very logically coherent. But for them, it was a Leonine issue. They thought that Peter spoke through him, so that, Vigilius could go, pound sand.
Yeah. All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Eric, for all of this.
Oh yeah, I learned a lot, man. I appreciate this. It was great.
Yeah, I appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time. Sorry, it was like an hour and 20. I know you're a busy guy. If you,
That's okay.
if
I enjoy every minute.
Thank you, bro. We're just gonna take some questions and wrap it up.
Yeah.
So Alex, I'll give you the background for this question, Eric. Alex is asking, Eric, do you think that Rome viewed the reunion of 433 as Saint Cyril walking back the 12 anathemas. So, in the Oriental Orthodox view of the formula of 433, we think of it as the Antiochian side, when they accepted 433, that replaces Ephesus 431. It replaces the 12 anathemas. The only thing that the Antiochians are then being asked to do is accept in hominem, in name, Theotokos, and anathematize Nestorius.
Mm-hmm.
That's it in the Antiochian mind. And in the Orthodox mind, and in Cyril's letters to St. Acacius, letter 40, and Eulogius, letter 44, he's interpreting that differently. So, now, so this question by Alex, he's saying, do you think that Rome viewed the reunion of 433 as St. Cyril walking back the 12 anathemas? Meaning, do you think Rome viewed it like the Antiochians viewed it, or like the Alexandrians viewed it?
No, I think they viewed it like the Alexandrians.
Got it. Okay, Blitz, Ephesus 2 and 3, ecumenical. Do we have X? So we list liturgically 3 ecumenical councils: Nicaea, Constantinople, and Ephesus, being 431. The other 2 are considered correct. They're considered they didn't, because the reason why we don't put it on there is because they don't put forth any doctrine. Ephesus 2, they just had the creed of 325, and they had the 12 anathemas of Cyril. They didn't put anything forth themselves. Ephesus 3 did the same thing, but with Constantinople 381 also. So they are considered correct councils, and you can't reject the council. It's like how the Roman Catholics have Lateran 649 or Constantinople 536. We consider Ephesus 2 and 3 like this. I hope that answers that question. From our friend Elijah. Subdeacon, what is the official stance on those Christological agreements between the OOs and RCs, and why are so many online OOs who are so against today's RC Christology? Okay. So the Christological agreements that we had with Rome, it seems to be that afterwards, when Rome made a Christological agreement with the Church of the East, the Christological agreements with us de facto were kind of thrown under all the papers. Like, everyone forgot about it, and it got lost, because you can't agree with us and with the Church of the East, because we don't agree with each other. So one of us is right and the other one is wrong. We're opposite ends of the spectrum. So it can't be that there can be Christological agreements with both sides, especially with Middle Eastern people, which both sides are, because they take it as an insult. Like, what are you guys, tricking us? Like, you're trying to just get us to say okay, you're not being sincere. So I think that's why. And then I think the second part of the question: why are so many OOs against RC Christology? Because they're still kind of viewing it in the same way that it happened in the 5th century, 6th century.
Like Severus.
Yeah. Exactly. Is it wrong to have EO icons in your house as an OO? No, not if they are Oriental Orthodox saints, and not if they show, because I know there are some EO icons of Christ that intentionally try to show 2 natures after the union. We wouldn't be okay with that. Okay, I have a question from Thomas Comerford on my phone. 1 second. Thomas?
Hey,
buddy.
Thank you, Mr. Ybarra. I was wondering what you think about maybe the following historical minutia, starting at, Chalcedon, and maybe going up about, the next century, that, in my opinion, prove the papacy from that perspective. And I'd like maybe your input on whether you think this or that agrees, but maybe this one isn't such strong evidence. One of them is that the history of Saint Dioscoros, as recorded by, I think it's Saint Theopistus, his disciple. Marcian, the emperor, and him are dialoguing, and essentially the attitude of Marcian is that, who are you to question Rome, who is, this bishop of bishops, or this, it's been a while since I've actually looked at it, but it's a strong sort of statement that he makes. And then, St. Dioscoros responds like, well, if he has the faith of, these saintly Roman popes, then I'll accept him, kind of thing. And then, so like that's at Chalcedon. And then you have also at Chalcedon, you have the fact that, like Subdeacon says, that Theodoret was accepted on the basis of Leo's acceptance of him. And you can't throw that as an in absentia condemnation that's like null and void from the beginning, because Second Constantinople says that Domnus' deposition at Ephesus II was also considered to be legitimate by Chalcedon, even though Domnus was also condemned in absentia. He wasn't going to the sessions anymore when they condemned him for heresy, basically. And so, like, that's at Chalcedon. And then we see, like, right after Chalcedon, and right after is kind of in quotes, but we see that, like, it's pretty much just Rome and Constantinople that can really have any claim to be part of the Chalcedonian communion. And then when St. Acacius of Constantinople is given orders by Rome to install Calendion as a parallel patriarch of Antioch, well, that's only able to be seen as a legitimate action if there is a supreme jurisdiction where Rome can make a quote-unquote parallel line, but it's actually legitimate because Rome is the arbiter of which line is legitimate and which isn't. And then, like, a little further on, we see that Macedonius II of Constantinople, I'm sorry for the rant, by the way, but these are just things that have been sitting in my head. So Macedonius II of Constantinople, and it's important to note that he was within the milieu of the Oikoimete monks of Constantinople, who were known for, having their liturgies all throughout, or their services throughout all the hours, But I'm sorry for the rant.
No, it's okay. Thank you for the input. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate Thomas's catalog there. I haven't seen him in a while. It's good to hear from him. Yeah, I think those are legitimate issues. The only thing I don't have any knowledge of is the letter or that dialogue between Justinian and that happened at Chalcedon. I'll have to look and see where the record of that is, because I'd like to look into it. But everything that he said after that, that all accords with orders being fulfilled in the East, and and even Anatolius recognizes that at the Council of Chalcedon, that they say, okay, yeah, well, they're Orthodox, but Leo's they always mention Leo's participation in that as kind of like the legal justification.
Thomas, you know where the record of that is?
Yeah, so it's recorded. It's the history of Dioscoros is what it's called. It's translated into French, but it's also cited in John Colaroffi's book.
Okay.
And
I still haven't gotten that book yet. Colaroffi's.
But I think what's really important is the Oikoimete milieu of those monks who were in communion with Rome and were very non-conforming to the Henoticon era, because we see individuals come out of that milieu, like Macedonius II, who was very pro-Rome in at least some senses, even if not in every sense. Like, as it regards whether or not Chalcedon could be overturned. And I remember he gave a very pro-Roman sentiment as to why it couldn't, at least at the time, be overturned. And then we see later, and this is, in my opinion, the really important guy, is John IV of Jerusalem was an Akoimete monk, even though he's like a century later. And he is the first person to, in an apologetic against Miaphysites, to say, hey, you guys should abandon your belief and follow us because we have the Roman pontiff who is according to the word of the Lord, or the promise of the Lord, the dictum of the Lord.
Infallible. Inerrant. Yeah, I remember that, reading that in S. Herbert Scott's book, Roman, the Papacy in the Eastern Churches, or Rome in the Eastern Churches, I can't remember which, but and it's on my list to chase down. In terms of authenticity, it's on my list of to-dos, because it almost sounds too good to be true at first, but my handling of it is not yet, I'm not comfortable to really write on it yet, because I haven't chased down the authenticity.
All right. Thank you, Thomas. Appreciate it, buddy.
Bye-bye, Thomas.
Okay. So Michael Apollo, good friend. Does Mr. Ybarra think Vigilius' initial proclamation regarding Ibas as an example of papal infallibility? If so, how could this be the case when Vigilius later says he was possessed by Satan? I think Eric might have answered this already, but go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's an ex cathedra decree, because he's not taking up a fresh doctrinal definition. What he's doing is he's defending. Well, first of all, he condemns Theodore's Nestorianism. So, a lot of people don't realize this, that the first constitution, they think that the first constitution was like a defense of Theodore of Mopsuestia, Theodoret, and Ibas. That's not what Vigilius was doing in his first constitution. The first constitution, he says, yep, you guys are right about Theodore, but we can't condemn him after his death. That's the first issue. Then the second is yep, you're right about Theodoret, but we should leave it alone because he was accepted at Chalcedon when he confessed, Cyrillian Christology in his mind, right? So it really did come down to the Ibasan letter, and that was really the whole thing. The majority of the first constitution was defending Ibas and saying that it conformed to Chalcedonian Christology. And then at the end, it said, if you deny that the letter of Ibas to Marie the Persian is Chalcedonian, then you deny Chalcedon. And because you deny Chalcedon, you would be excommunicated if you did this, right? Then when 6 months later, when he writes the letter to it's Eutychius, right? Eutychius of Constantinople. He writes a letter to the Patriarch of Constantinople, basically saying that he was always Orthodox. So this is that last line there when he says he was possessed by Satan. I don't ever recall Vigilius saying he was possessed by Satan. What I recall him saying is that the evil one has caused ruptures in the peace of the church, and he doesn't say it was just in him alone, but more of like what Satan was tricking. He was devising a trap amongst the Western contingent in Constantinople and the Justinian and the Eastern patriarchs. I don't recall Vigilius ever saying like he was demon possessed when he wrote his first constitution. In fact, in his second constitution, Vigilius said that he had always been Orthodox. So this is one of those things that the like you hear from Eastern Orthodox, they always bring up this issue about Vigilius. Well, here's something you guys have to deal with for the Eastern Orthodox who are listening. The second constitution of Vigilius was accepted by Justinian and the Eastern patriarchs. And in that constitution, Vigilius said that when it came to Christological doctrine, he had been thoroughly correct. It was a mistake on thinking Ebas's letter was read at Chalcedon's 14th session, and so he revises that decision. So yeah, it's kind of, you see Eastern Orthodox apologists, they suck on this story like a leech, but there's not much blood there for the leech.
Right.
I don't think, anyway.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric, for that. Okay. Alex, if the 12 anathemas were still accepted, meaning at Chalcedon, why did the papal legates and Maximus of Antioch accept the letter of Phoebus as orthodox? Because as you know, Eric, Chalcedon doesn't read out the 12 anathemas.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also I think I can't remember this I don't have a citation for, but I remember Ebas was stated to say that he didn't understand what Cyril was saying in his anathemas, and so later said that he read him wrong. I think that was something that was said to that effect, in order to explain why Ebas is speaking evil about Cyril's anathemas in that letter that he wrote to Marie.
Right. Awesome. Let's see here. Yeah, Theodora can have the words really next to it. Yeah, I was paraphrasing. I believe this is Michael Apollo. I believe his words were something along the lines of the evil and inspiring him to write the defense of Phoebus. Isn't Theodoret recorded as insulting Saint Cyril? Yeah, he wrote to the churches congratulating them on Cyril's death and saying he feels sorry for hell that now they have to deal with Cyril.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think that's it. I don't see any other questions. Thank you again, Eric, so much for your time. I really appreciate it, buddy.
Oh, no, it was great. Thank you so much. We'll do it again.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And God bless you. There's a random question. Just get one more out there. Random question: if Cyril was alive at Chalcedon, would you think he would have agreed or not agreed? In light of formula of reunion with the anti-previously? Obviously, I'm going to say no, and Eric is going to say yes. I mean,
yeah. Let sleeping dogs lie. Right.
Right. Okay. All right. Thanks again, Eric. I appreciate
thank you.
Have a good night. Subscribe Eric's book. Don't forget the Papacy. Eric, you have any other plugs?
No, just I'm you can find me on Facebook or Erick Ybarra or ErickYbarra.com. I got 2 websites, and my YouTube channel, Classical Christian Thought. That's it.
Awesome. Okay. Take care, everybody.
All right.